Hello everyone. Tonight we travel back to 15th century Korea, deep into the labyrinth of royal scholarship and wooden letters. You find yourself standing at the threshold of the Jefyeonjan, the Hall of Worthies, where the ceilings are high and the expectations even higher. The scent of mulberry paper, old inkstones, and cedar shelves wraps around you like a strangely academic incense. Your bare feet thud softly against polished stone tiles as you step into a place where ideas are currency, and even a single stroke of a character could cause a bureaucratic meltdown. Before you settle in, take a second to like the video and subscribe, but only if you truly enjoy the stories. Let me know in the comments where you're listening from and what time it is. I love seeing how bedtime looks around the world. So, get comfy, blanket, pillow, whatever helps, and let's drift into tonight's tale together. In front of you, lines of scholars in flowing robes bend over low tables. Their brushes flick and curl in a choreographed chaos of ideographs, rice paper, and elbow nudges. Somewhere in the corner, someone sneezes, anxiously, because even dust here feels like it's under surveillance. You're not here to compose poetry or translate Confucian classics. No, your task tonight is far less glamorous and significantly more maddening. You're here to learn how this brilliant but paper-clogged institution kept track of thousands of tiny wooden letters used for printing. And spoiler alert, you probably wouldn't survive this job for more than a week. See, unlike the smooth metallic movable type that Gutenberg's crew would later popularize in Europe, these wooden hanja characters were stubborn, prone to swelling in the humidity, and suspiciously fond of going missing. Think alphabet soup, but all the pieces are brown, vaguely similar, and absolutely unforgiving if misfiled. You begin your evening by trailing behind an assistant named Jae-em, a young apprentice who seems to survive solely on barley cakes and passive aggression. He leads you down a corridor lined with floor to ceiling trays, each filled with hand-carved wooden blocks, each block a single Chinese character. It's like walking into a library where all the books exploded into individual letters and politely ask to be sorted. Don't touch anything, Guy mutters, just as you instinctively reach toward a curiously glossy block. The Jefyeonjan was no ordinary royal archive. Under King Sejong's reign, yes, the same Sejong who would later oversee the birth of the Korean Hangul script. This hall became a hotbed of innovation. But even before Hangul, the need for mass communication and scholarly dissemination meant using hanja characters carved into wood. Thousands of them. And unlike monks in a cave chanting mantras, Korean scholars needed their letters on demand. Here's the thing, the average text they printed required anywhere from 2,000 to 5,000 unique characters. Each one had to be located, retrieved, ink, pressed, cleaned, and returned to its exact place, or chaos would reign. Lo's a stroke from the character for virtue, and congratulations, you've just printed the word for sausage. Historians still argue whether Korea's system of movable type predated Gutenberg's by mere decades or centuries. But everyone agrees on one thing: the Korean system was mind-bendingly meticulous. The Jefyeonjan wasn't just a place of learning, it was a production line of precision. As you follow Gayo, he introduces you to the Mokja Gam, the overseer of the wooden characters. The man doesn't blink so much as narrow his eyes in slow motion, as if every eyelid movement costs energy that could be used for organizing consonants. His robes are stained with soot, and he carries a tiny brush behind one ear, used not for writing, but for flicking away crumbs from letter trays. This, Gyayem whispers reverently, is the man who once found a missing character behind a loose floor tile. He's a legend. You nod? Suddenly aware that your own modern desk job involves significantly fewer floor tiles and significantly more. As you watch the operation unfold, it becomes clear these scholars aren't just smart. They're logistical geniuses. Think librarians, but with the daily existential risk of printing. Your Majesty is an eggplant. By accidentally swapping two radicals, the room hums with activity. One team prepares the ink. Another arranges blank paper sheets with the delicacy of setting down newborn kittens. The actual typesetters, mostly older scholars with absurdly keen eyesight, hunch over wooden trays the size of dresser drawers, picking out characters with chopstick, like tweezers. It's a miracle anyone finished anything. And yet, despite the chaos, the occasional inky sneeze, and one guy in the corner who keeps muttering angrily at a piece of punctuation, you can't help but admire the system. Somewhere between obsessive craftsmanship and collective madness, the Jefferson got the job done. Still, the thought lingers. How on earth did they manage to not lose half the alphabet every full moon? You're about to find out, because tomorrow the hall will attempt a new printing, 200 characters strong, and you've just been assigned to inventory duty. Try not to panic. You arrive before dawn, greeted not by birdsong, but by the groaning creak of wooden cabinets opening. The Jifionjon smells faintly of pine resin and yesterday's candle smoke. Gyayem is already there, nibbling a scorched rice cracker with the dead-eyed stare of someone who has memorized the location of every tray labelled miscellaneous punctuation. Oh, your new task. Help track the wooden letters. Not write, not print track. As in, count and cross reference thousands of individual blocks without losing your mind or your breakfast. Welcome to the least glamorous part of Korea's printing miracle. First, you're handed a flat, rectangular tray, unpainted, but with neat dividers. Each little cell holds a block about the size of a large postage stamp, carved on one side with a reversed character. A few are worn smooth from overuse. Others look suspiciously like they've been chewed on. Gyayem eyes your tray and sighs. That's tray 7B. It's supposed to hold 2U40 glyphs. If even one is missing, we're in trouble. Why? Because this particular set is for printing official edicts. Edicts that travel across the kingdom. If a single character is wrong, it won't just be a typo, it'll be a scandal. Or worse, a decapitation-worthy misunderstanding. You settle onto a straw mat beside the other assistants. It's a surprisingly cosy row of people hunched over trays, squinting at characters like they're fortune cookies of doom. Next to you, an older scribe mutters, "Didn't we already lose a doe last month?" And everyone around him groans. That block, for loyalty, had gone missing for 3 full days and was finally discovered wedged inside a tea caddy. No one speaks of who put it there, but the tea hasn't tasted right since. Here's the system they use, and it's simultaneously brilliant and absurd. Each wooden type block is assigned a unique shelf position. A physical coordinate like drawer 12, column C, slot 4. It's like a premodern Excel sheet carved out of cedar. Whenever a letter is pulled for printing, its absence is marked in a brush ledger, written by hand in thick ink, with the drawer number and character name beside it. Brush ledgers, yes, plural, are updated constantly. One ledger records withdrawals, another returns, and a third tracks. Letters in wash, which basically means one's currently being cleaned of excess ink. The ledgers are stored in their own miniature chest, with lockable drawers, because of course they are. And because human error is eternal, every block removed must be visually checked by two people. You and Gaiam begin your work in solemn silence, confirming that tray 7B has its full allotment of characters. You recite each aloud as he checks. Reni Li to sing. At about character 40, 5 you hit a snag. Gaiam. There are 2 Odger blocks in here. He leans over, frowns, and picks one up with tongs. One of these isn't supposed to be here. This kind of duplication is a known problem. Sometimes, during recarving of worn blocks, extras were accidentally made, or worse, made incorrectly. Slight curve in the stroke could mean wisdom, or if you're not careful, brisket, which would definitely send the wrong message to provincial governors. Historians still argue whether these duplications were intentional backups or the result of sloppy carving by sleep, deprived artisans. One scholar insisted they were created during a brief flirtation with mass production efficiency. Others claim it was simply a case of too many carvers, not enough editors. Whatever the cause, you now have to sort out which gets banished. Gaiam makes a note in the ledger, tugs a tiny silk tag from his sleeve, and ties it to the offending duplicate with a red string. This one's going in the Jebun day, he says, pointing to a separate box marked with a bright orange cord. The Jebun day is the tray of shame. Blocks that need rechecking, possibly recarving, or in rare cases, burning. Yes, burning. One assistant allegedly destroyed a letter after it misprinted the king's title as something mildly inappropriate involving the word pants. As morning sun starts to slant through the lattice windows, you notice the shelves are getting more chaotic. Despite the obsessive ledgering, blocks often get returned to the wrong spot. Scholars blame tired hands, distracted minds, and once a bird, one pigeon, somehow, flew in through a ventilation slit and kicked over 2 entire trays of numerals. The poor thing was caught, forgiven, and later immortalized in a poem by a bored assistant. You pause your inventory to stretch your legs. The wooden flooring underfoot is grooved with centuries of pacing. There's even a small ink, smudge trail in one hallway where an overburdened scribe once dropped a pot of black ink and kept walking, muttering, it's fine," like a man possessed. Your break is short-lived. Gaiam snaps his fingers. Lunch. Lunch is served in near-silence rice, pickled radish, a hard-boiled egg, and tea so strong it could legally classify as ink. Most workers eat with one hand and scribble notes with the other. You spot a few using their rice bowls to rest errant blocks, something you're immediately told never to do. Bits of fermented bean paste can permanently stain the blocks, and besides, no one wants to bite into conquest by accident. One assistant, an older man with fingers stained black from years of ink, leans over and confides. Back in my day, we didn't use these fancy ledgers. We kept it all in our heads. You nod politely while making a mental note to never trust his head with anything. By the end of the day, you've catalogued 6 trays, logged 3 duplicates, discovered 1 missing radical, and survived tea that tasted like vengeance. Your knees ache. your fingers are stained. But something about this entire process, the clunky grace of it, the collaboration, feels timeless. And it's only just begun. The next morning, the Geffyonjon greets you with a mild sense of dread and the familiar smell of overboiled ink. Guillaume hands you a stack of thick brush paper sheets, each crammed with dense columns of Honja. "Here's today's layout," he says, tossing a block of pine beside it. "Get pulling." You glance at the document. It's a land tax proclamation. Dry, technical, and about as exciting as a bowl of cold noodles. But it's packed with over 3,000 individual characters. Worse, more than 800 of them are unique to this printing. That means someone, "Hi, it's you," must locate and retrieve each letter from the Great Cedar hive of drawers, while keeping everyone in perfect order. Let the chaos begin. You trudge to the type cabinets, which are now swarming with assistants. It's like a library merged with an anthill. People dart from one drawer to another, holding tiny tongs and muttering character names like grocery lists. There's a frantic rhythm to it, as if everyone's brain is split, screening between linguistics, logistics, and mild existential despair. The movable type system, called Gabinja, was revolutionary. Korea had already experimented with metal type as early as the 13th century, but under Sejong, the wooden letter era reached peak madness. Movable wood type was cheaper to carve and lighter to carry than bronze, but it had a fatal flaws in splinters, swelling, and near total chaos when left unsupervised. One moment, a perfectly crisp character. The next, a waterlogged guo that now resembles a tofu accident. And that's assuming it even stays put. Left in the wrong slot, a letter might go undiscovered for days, or worse, be mistakenly used in another document entirely. It's like mixing up your keys and discovering too late that you've opened someone else's diary. That's why printers developed what you now lovingly call the chaotic, neutral method, a balance between intense oversight and resigned improvisation. There's no universal layout for the trays. Instead, characters are grouped loosely by function, radicals in one drawer, numeric glyphs in another, and high use ideographs, words like king, land, tax, rice, punishment, in their own elite section. Some trays even feature hand, painted dots, or coded stripes for faster retrieval, though historians still argue whether those were systematic aids or just one calligrapher's bad sense of humour. Today, you've been assigned to pull characters for an entire paragraph involving livestock quotas, the most used glyph. No, it's a cow, which appears 11 times. You're told to check that you haven't accidentally grabbed war, noon, instead. They're nearly identical, and swappable only if you want to confuse an entire province into thinking lunch is taxable. You get to work, pick, check, log, place, pick, check, log, repeat. By hour 2, your brain is screaming, and your handwriting has devolved into something that looks like a chicken dipped in ink, walked across the page. And then it happens. A crack from across the room, followed by a groan. Someone dropped a tray. You freeze. Everyone freezes. Tray 9H has collapsed to the floor, scattering hundreds of characters like Scrabble tiles on a sugar rush. Guillaume hurries over. The Mokja Gam, red-faced, bellows a curse so archaic, it probably hasn't been uttered since the Silla dynasty. You edge closer and see the disaster. Several high-frequency characters, Ming, Fa, and the always irreplaceable Wang, are now mixed among others, or possibly missing. Worse, one appears to have bounced under a shelf. The recovery protocol kicks in. A circle forms. Everyone kneels. Characters are examined with the kind of reverence usually reserved for royal relics or rare snacks. Each one is inked on a slip of tracing paper and laid beside its neighbours to confirm legibility. You're given the task of crawling under the shelf, armed with a small hook and a broom made from pine needles. Somewhere in the dark, your fingers close around something rectangular and smooth. It's Wong, the king, somehow intact, though now flecked with a suspicious smear of dried bean paste. You emerge triumphant, blinking in the dusty sunlight, and hand the block back to the Mokja Gam, who mutters a silent prayer to whatever deity keeps printers from accidentally executing officials via typo. The panic subsides. Trays are refilled. Ledgers updated. You take a moment to sip lukewarm barley tea and contemplate whether early printers ever cried in the bathhouse after work. You suspect yes. Here's the thing nobody tells you: movable type is a lie. It moves, yes, but the real work is in tracking it. The printing might take an hour, the sorting and retrieval, days, weeks even. It's like preparing a meal for 1,000 guests and realizing each spoon needs its own map. And yet the system works, mostly. Despite the disorganization, the strange markings, the whispered complaints about missing radicals, the entire machine of scholarship and communication keeps chugging forward, letter by letter, day by day. Historians still argue whether this loosely managed chaos was intentional, an early embrace of what modern office managers might call controlled entropy. Some argue for method, others for madness. But as you watch the characters march their way across the press board, forming sentences destined for distant provinces, it's clear that the truth is somewhere in between. You return to your mat, brush in hand, and begin logging today's retrieved characters, one by one, like always. Because if you don't, well, someone might tax a goat instead of a field. Again, night falls quietly over the Jeffianjan, but the lights stay lit. Oil lamps glow behind papered windows, casting slow, moving silhouettes of hunched backs and flicking brushes. You're still at it, cross-legged on a reed mat, your spine now permanently shaped like a parenthesis. Double, checking a tray of wooden letters that are beginning to blur together into pure abstraction. You're doing the night shift now, and this is where the real magic, or madness, happens. By candlelight, every character becomes a test of your eyesight, memory, and possibly your will to live. Jaiom, unfazed as ever, sits beside you dipping his brush into fresh ink with the rhythm of a monk. Only 1,200 more to go. He says without looking up. You think he's joking. He is not. The night ledger is its own beast thicker paper, darker ink, and a far stricter tone. Every action must be written clearly in duplicate, once for record, once for redundancy. If you miswrite a character while logging it, you have to redo the entire sheet. No scratch-outs. No corrections. Just start over. Somewhere, a former assistant once made 7 errors in one log, and now tends a garden full, time in the countryside, still muttering about unforgivable radicals. You begin your candlelit audit with Tray 3D, which holds high, frequency administrative characters. The usual suspects: law, grain, people, taxes. You pull them out one by one. Verify their carving, check them against a shadowboard stencil, and set them gently in order. Jaiom hands you the brush every 3rd letter. He's watching for errors, but more importantly, He's watching for you to blink. One misplaced character, and the next regional directive might tell farmers to confess rice instead of collect rice. You think it sounds funny. The Ministry of Agriculture would not. Now imagine you're doing this after 14 hours of labour, in a room where even the moths seem judgmental. And yet, it's in this dim, aching haze that you realise something. The entire system rests on memory and eyes. The night shift isn't a backup, it's essential. Day teams move fast, assemble layouts, ink and print. Night teams double check, reorder, and essentially protect the intellectual lifeblood of the kingdom. It's like being the sleepy janitor of knowledge, except instead of mops, you wield tweezers and despair. Historians still argue whether these candlelight audits were standard or just a Jefferson quirk. Some records suggest other print centres operated with more flexible verification systems, less auditing, more assuming no one would notice. But in the royal hall, every character mattered, especially at night, when errors like to creep like little goblins into the margins. You glance at your current letter, Shan, virtue, a beautiful character, simple, symmetrical. You hold it up to the flickering light and almost admire it until Jayam murmurs, "That's actually Yang with a mark. You've been holding a sheep for 10 minutes. Right, moving on. To keep track of your audit progress, you use a small bamboo tolly stick. For every completed tray, you notch a groove. You're up to 4 notches. A 5th earns you a stale rice cracker. You begin chewing with the solemnity of someone taking communion. Breaks are rare, but allowed, once per tray. Most assistants spend them rubbing their eyes, stretching their backs, or whispering ancient curses toward drawers that never open smoothly. One particularly bitter printer once carved a short poem into the underside of a tray. You sneak a peek and find it. Words, words, endless words. My knees are dust. I dream of blank paper. Poetic despair aside, you press on. Midway through tray 5A, Gaiam points out a recurring problem the character, E, keeps being confused with E. Both are complex, visually similar and common in bureaucratic language. It happens a lot, he says, tapping the side of his head. Too many strokes. Brain stops carrying. To help with this, some teams develop mnemonics. Little rhymes or visual cues carved faintly into the back of the block. One has a tiny line scratched into the top, left corner, a code for its tray. Another is painted ever so, slightly redder than the rest. None of this is technically allowed, of course. But when you've been tracking letters in the dark for weeks, rule, bending starts to look like survival. It's well past midnight now. Your hands are trembling slightly, but you finish your 6th tray. Gaiam smiles for the first time all night and tosses you a fresh brush. Final tray. It's a special one, Tray 9Z. The archive tray. It contains rarely used characters, old royal titles, ceremonial terms, obsolete legal expressions. You're told to handle them like relics. One wrong breath, and you might erase a word that hasn't been spoken aloud since the previous dynasty. You pull out a curious glyph. Rang, a mythical bird often used in royal poems. You half expect it to chirp. It doesn't. Instead, it's cracked slightly along the side, worn by centuries of respectful avoidance. You log it anyway. Brush dipped. Letter steady. And when the candle finally gutters out, and the wind sighs faintly through the shutters, you sit back against the wall, your brain humming with character forms, radical components, and the soft satisfaction of order restored, at least for now. The next morning, the sun is barely up before the hall is awake again, and you're assigned to a team working not on printing, but on something far more maddening, the brush list system. If you thought the trays of letters were confusing, wait until you meet the royal tracking records, inked by hand, stored in scrolls longer than oxen, and updated with a level of precision usually reserved for archery tournaments. The brush list, known in shorthand as the Char, Juk, Mokrok, is the nervous system of the entire printing operation. It documents where every letter is, where it went, who used it, why, when it's coming back, and what soup was being eaten when it was misplaced. Okay, maybe not that last part, but it should. You're assigned a mentor today, Scholar Im, a man who walks like he's never sat down in his life, and whose brush control could shame a mountain breeze. He rolls out a fresh sheet and begins scribing the location log, one of 3 critical records kept per day. There's the usage log. He explains, eyes not leaving the brush. The return log and the damage ledger. The way he says damage ledger makes your spine twitch. The idea is simple, if insane. Whenever a character is pulled from its tray, a brush log entry is created using a pre-agreed format. Think of it like a medieval library checkout, but where every single letter has its own library card, and forgetting to sign it can lead to the Mokja. Gam yelling your name across the courtyard with the fury of a man who hasn't slept in 6 years. You begin your shift assisting with the usage log. It's already filling fast. Draw 6B, character though, pulled by Assistant Cho for line 14 of the taxation manuscript. Drawer 2D, character 2, pulled for border document. Return expected before sundown. You help sort these notes into long, rolled paper scrolls, each marked with wax seals and tiny brush strokes to indicate status. Green dot, currently in use. Red slash, returned and cleaned. Black triangle. Oh, that one's in the damage ledger, which means someone broke a stroke again. And the brushes! Oh, the brushes! Each log entry must be made with a specific kind of brush. Not too soft, not too coarse, because the ledgers are stored for years and must be legible even after 4 generations of humidity and cockroach raids. There's a whole cabinet just for logging brushes. They're labelled by firmness and hair type rabbit, weasel, goat, and one ominously labelled mystery blend. You try your hand at making a single entry. The brush is lighter than you expect, the ink thick like tar. You carefully form each stroke, praying your Zing doesn't look like Jin. Scholar Im watches, nods, then points out that your final dot is slightly heavy. Make it look like it meant to be there, he says, which might also double as life advice. The entire system functions on mutual paranoia. The assumption is that everyone is going to mess up eventually, and the brush lists exist to catch the mistake before it becomes a political catastrophe. If an incorrect character goes to print, the logs can trace it back to the exact drawer, day, and assistant responsible. A bureaucratic version of forensics, except instead of fingerprints, it's all in brushwork. Still, mistakes happen. Scholar Im shows you a blotchy, smudged entry from 3 weeks ago. See this? He asks. They log the character. Se, as shui. It changed the meaning from Ayer to tax. An entire village thought the New Year festival had been turned into a tax audit. He chuckles. But the kind of chuckle that comes from someone who's cried in a storage room more than once. Historians still argue how universal these brush list systems were. Some believe they were an innovation exclusive to the Jefyeonjeon and the inner circle of royal printers. Others think every major printing center in 15th century Korea had its own version, some using ink, some using stamp tokens, and at least one rumored to have used color-coded rice grains. No one takes that last theory seriously, but it's been published in 2 essays. You carry on logging. The longer you work, the more elegant the system begins to appear, like a tangled web that somehow still holds its shape. The ledgers form a backup of the backup of the backup. If a letter vanishes, the brush logs can pinpoint where it was last seen. If one is damaged, the damage ledger explains how. Even the moksha, GAM has a personal side, log of characters most likely to go rogue, which he guards like it's the royal treasury. One assistant, bored during a slow afternoon, has started doodling in the margins. Small sketches of frogs, fans, and angry letter blocks with faces. Jayum catches you grinning at one and leans in. That's his theory of letter consciousness, he whispers. Hay believes the characters know when they're being watched. You want to laugh. But then you drop your brush, and the letter, Yi, rolls gently toward you unprovoked. By late afternoon, the entire team is reviewing the day's final entries. You wrap scrolls, tie them with twine, and place them in the fireproof clay container that will hold them overnight. If a letter goes missing in the morning, this record will be your one lifeline. The logs are filed into a pigeonhole system, each day in its own slot, sealed with a wooden token carved with the date and team mark. You place yours with satisfaction. A good shift. No smudges. No errors. No accusations of character fraud. You're even given a reward, the good ink. Richer, smoother, blacker than night. You dip your brush and make a final note on the day's summary. Letters tracked. None lost. Fingers sore. Morale. Fragile. Gyaim gives a rare nod of approval. Tomorrow you'll be moving on to trays again. But for tonight, the brush list sleeps. You return the next morning expecting to dive back into a simple draw check. But no. Today you're thrown into the most infamous part of the whole letter system tray management. Or, as Gyaim calls it with a suspicious glint in his eye, tray stack Tetris. The tray room is unlike any other chamber in the Jefyeonjeon. It's tall, narrow, and lined floor to ceiling with wooden shelving packed with rectangular letter trays. Each no wider than your forearm, but stacked with a weight that feels symbolic. The entire space creaks like an overburdened ship, and everyone walks with the slow, deliberate posture of people who've witnessed at least one tray avalanche in their time. Your first task, retrieve a set of trays labelled 2E through 2K. Sounds easy. It is not. These trays were not designed for ease of access. They are packed in like festival sardines, stacked 6 high in wooden racks with minimal labelling. Each tray weighs close to 4 kilograms. Not because of the wood, but because of the psychological weight of potentially dropping 200 years of linguistic order on the floor. You and Gyaim begin gently sliding tray 2E off its shelf, using both hands and what remains of your optimism. As soon as it clears the support ledge, you feel it a subtle shift in balance, as if the letters themselves are testing your worth. Gyaim steadies one side with his knee. Breathe, he mutters. Never rush a tray. That's how Scholar Bake lost his toes. You blink. Toes. Gyaim just raises an eyebrow. Tray 2E slides out intact, and you carry it carefully to the sorting mat. This one contains MID, frequency administrative glyphs. Important but not flashy. Think, petition, approval, border, and everyone's least favourite, inspection. Now the Tetris part begins. See, once the letters are retrieved and used in printing, they don't always go back to their original trays. Ideally, they do, but in the chaos of long hours and ink-stained hands, they often get tossed into the nearest available space. The result? A nightmare of wrong letter, wrong drawer. Your job is to compare the current tray layout with a tray map. A diagram drawn in brush ink showing where each letter should be. You do this by lifting every block, checking the back for subtle markings or tray, position notches, and reassigning anything that's wandered off. It's like solving a 3D logic puzzle while being judged by the ghost of Confucius. And it's not just about letters being in the right place. They must also face the correct orientation. If a block is flipped the wrong way, it will print mirrored. That's not just a mistake. It's a summon me to the palace for questioning mistake. You begin the re-sorting, block by block, stroke by stroke. After an hour your eyes blur, and all the radicals start looking like someone spilled noodles on the table. You come across two nearly identical glyphs, Shang's reward and Shang's commerce. They're supposed to live in different trays, but they've been neighbours for weeks now. You wonder if they've become friends. Some printers mark trays with subtle dots of coloured lacquer, red for royal terms, black for punishments, green for agriculture. It's unofficial, of course, but widely accepted. Guillaume calls it quiet heresy and shows you a personal trick. He carves a micro notch on the tray edge when a drawer contains letters prone to mix-ups, like yand, gu. One means speech, the other valley, a classic disaster just waiting to happen in a land grant document. Historians still debate whether these unofficial systems were tolerated by higher ups or quietly encouraged. The records never mention them. But then again, the records also don't mention scholar backs toes. Midway through the sorting, a senior printer calls out, Tray 3G is missing its L again. A collective groan follows. That character, meaning responsibility or blame, is infamous for vanishing mysteriously, as if actively trying to escape its own meaning. You eventually find it, nestled between Siit and Bay, sea shelf, in a tray it has no business occupying. Jayam retrieves it, rolls his eyes, and mutters, typical. At lunchtime, the tray room becomes briefly deserted. You take a quiet moment to stretch your back and look around. Every shelf is slightly warped with age. Some trays still bear ink smudges from decades ago. One has a butterfly wing stuck to its side, preserved under lacquer like a forgotten tribute to the gods of alignment. You notice something odder in the upper corner of a shelf labelled Retired Ideographs. There's a tray sealed with wax. No one has touched it all day. Jayam follows your gaze. That's tray Eurex, he says. We don't open that one. Why not? It holds characters the court no longer uses. Outdated words. Obsolete terms. Some are too close to current royal names. Bad luck to print them. Once, an apprentice used a retired character in a border tax scroll and caused 3 days of panic. You back away instinctively. As the day winds down, your hands stained and your brain 3 glyphs away from collapse, you finish realigning tray 2E. Every letter back where it belongs. Every mark facing the right way. You carefully slide it into place on the shelf. One down. Only 213 more trays to go. But for now, you're given the rare gift of acknowledgement. The Mokja, Gam walks by, glances at your work, and says nothing, which, in this place, is the highest praise imaginable. Late that evening, after your body has become a stiff puppet of ink, stained muscle memory, you're called in for a special task. Something delicate, possibly dangerous, the kind of duty whispered about in overworked tones misprint recovery. See, despite all the systems, the trays, the logs, the night audits, letters still go rogue. Sometimes they vanish. Sometimes they wear down until To Sahed becomes Ye Settle Page. And sometimes someone uses a type block that was never supposed to be in circulation to begin with. Tonight's culprit, a diplomatic letter, freshly printed, containing a phrase meant to praise a neighbouring governor for his steadfast leadership, but instead of Jian, the character for steadfast, it prints Zhu, pig. You stare at the sheet in horror. It's still drying, thank the gods, but the brush notes confirm it's already been proofed by a junior scribe. The wrong junior scribe. And somehow, no one caught it until Jiam was reading the press copy with his usual dead-eyed sarcasm and murmured, "Why are we complimenting him on his porkiness?" What follows is chaos. The Mokja, Gam slams down a paperweight with a thud that echoes across the hall. Everyone scatters. You're pulled into a side room with Gayum and Scholar Im. Your mission, find out how this happened, and fast. Step 1 is checking the tray logs. You unravel today's usage log and follow the chain backward. Tray 4H, that's where Jen lives. The character was pulled, signed out, used, and apparently returned. But when you open tray 4H, it's not Jian in that slot. It's Zhu, Qiu collective exhale. Now comes the worst part, tracking who made the switch. You check the return log. Scholar Im reads it aloud with increasing dread. Returned by Assistant Han. Hour of the Monkey. Gahan. No, he's enthusiastic. The kind of guy who uses his sleeve to clean blocks, and once labelled a tray, mostly fine, in the damage ledger. Not exactly your first choice for nuance. You and Gayom retrieve the incorrect block and bring it under the examination lamp. The carving is shallow, rushed. Definitely a miscut. Perhaps even one of those mysterious practice blocks that occasionally slip into trays when newer assistants try to show initiative. Gayem grimaces. This wasn't even in the ledger system. Someone snuck this into the tray by mistake. You gently scrape the side of the block with a thumbnail. There, almost invisible, is the telltale notch of a training letter. A subtle groove that marks it as non-printable. These blocks are supposed to be kept in the Yong, Geoham, a box of unused glyphs. How this one ended up in the active tray is a mystery. Maybe Han grabbed it in a rush, you suggest. Or maybe... Scholar Im says slowly, someone reshuffled the tray and didn't log it. The air gets heavy. Historians still argue whether such incidents were widespread or rare. Official records downplay them, of course, but in the margins of old letters and forgotten notebooks, you find hints. Strange typos, odd retractions, sudden errata sheets that suggest not even the meticulous Jeffyeonjaun could avoid the occasional pork-related diplomatic crisis. To fix the issue, a replacement page is immediately typeset. The correct Jen is located, verified by 3 assistants. and slotted into place like it's about to perform in a bollet. Gayam supervises the reprint with all the emotion of a funeral director. When it's done, the new page is folded, sealed, and marked with a double stroke to indicate version 2, the original, burned, quietly, without ceremony, and the rogue block. Scholar Im confiscates it himself and tucks it into his sleeve with the care usually reserved for cursed artifacts. I'll see it gets archived. You don't ask what that means. You just nod. Later that night, the staff gathers in the tea corner for post-crisis calm. There's a whispered round of jokes about pigs and governors, and who will get the honour of explaining the error if word gets out. Gayam stirs his tea and says, "Could be worse. At least it wasn't us, the character for death." Everyone nods solemnly. You sip your tea. It's bitter, smoky, possibly reboiled too many times. But somehow, after all that, it tastes steady. Like resilience. Misprints are inevitable. No system is perfect. Even a team of elite scholars working in harmony will drop a tray, mix a radical, or forget which character means defense and which one means mango. And yet, every error teaches you something, not just about language, but about humility. Later, while shelving the corrected tray, you notice a small inscription etched into the underside. Faint, but clear, check twice, bow once. It's not attributed to anyone, but it sticks with you. Before bed, Jayum hands you a folded slip of parchment. Inside is the corrected Jane, drawn in brush, framed with 4 gentle dots. Hang it over your mat, he says. A little reminder. You do. And that night, you dream not of errors or pigs, but of letters glowing softly, humming to each other in the dark, as if grateful to be understood. This morning, you're shadowing a man who might be the most misunderstood figure in the entire Jeffeonjon the Labeler. His official title is something bland like Record Supervisor 3rd Class, but everyone just calls him Tag Master Jang. You've heard of him in whispers, half praise, half parody. He's the one who insists that every block, yes, every single character block, deserves its own identifying label, tracking mark, and placement code, complete with date of last use and character mood, whatever that means. Tag Master Jang believes in order the way monks believe in enlightenment. When you meet him, he's hunched over a magnifying lens, holding a tight block up to the light like a jeweller inspecting a sapphire. This one's been over, inked, he grumbles. Look at that right stroke, puffy as a dumpling. You see nothing. He sees everything. Your job today is to assist in label rotation, a task that sounds simple until you realize what it involves. Reapplying tiny red, lacquer marks to hundreds of blocks whose labels have faded, flaked, or, scandal of scandals, were applied crookedly to begin with. His system, he explains, is both color, coded, and symbolically layered. Red dots mean the letter is high frequency. Blue ink indicates it was recently recarved. Black slash, previous error. And then there's the vertical bar, used only for blocks stored in the alternate trays. The ones accessed when demand overwhelms the main line. You carefully pick up a block marked T, strategy. There's a faded red square on its base, and you're tasked with refreshing it. Jang hands you the tiniest brush you've ever seen and a small pot of red lacquer that smells like pine and punishment. Not too much, he warns. This isn't a festival mask. You paint it. Slightly off, center. Jang sighs so hard the candle beside him flickers. You redo it. This time, it's acceptable. Over the next hour, you learn the rhythm, examine the bass, read the faded tag, check the tray log for the character's last known location, and reapply the symbol. Most letters are straightforward. A few are odd. You find one with 3 different tags on its base, layered atop each other. You show it to Jang. He squints. Ah yes, the tree, labelled OD. It's been part of 3 different tray systems. Old Royal, Revised Confucian, and the short-lived colour, coding error of 1446. His tone makes it sound like 1446 was a war. You keep going. By midday, little did your hands are lacquer, stained and your brain is humming with symbols. But here's the strange thing, it works. Once labelled, the blocks seem easier to spot, easier to sort. Jang's methods, for all their eccentricity, make the system faster. A little touch of red saves someone 5 minutes of draw, searching. Multiply that by 1,000, and suddenly, your label, Obsessed Elder, starts looking like a logistical savant. Still, not everyone's a fan. During lunch, you overhear 2 scribes grumbling that Jang's system makes the blocks too fussy. That letters should speak for themselves. Gaiam rolls his eyes and mutters, "Those are the same guys who misprinted the Emperor's name last winter." Point taken. Historians still argue whether Jang's labelling methods were ever formalised into national practice. Some say he was ahead of his time, laying the groundwork for what would become standardised character libraries. Others believe his system died with him, discarded in favour of less complicated nonsense. But in the moment, watching him cradle each block like it's a rare artifact, you can't help but admire the commitment. Later that afternoon, you're asked to help him inspect a tray migration. A process where letters are moved from a damaged tray to a new one. You help lift the brittle old cedar board, and as it creaks under your fingers, you spot a note carved into the underside in tiny brush script. Jang reads it aloud. "F lost. I go where speech lives." You glance at him. "Who wrote that?" "No idea," he says, deadpan. "But I like their flair." The new tray is lined with soft mulberry paper to cushion the blocks. Each character is cleaned, relabeled, and slotted into its new home, like a guest being seated at a royal banquet. The mood in the room softens. It feels like a retirement ceremony for blocks that have spent a lifetime being inked and pressed and cleaned and whispered about. Before wrapping up, Jang reaches into a side drawer and pulls out a thin, silk-bound ledger. His personal tag register. It's not official. It's not even authorized. But it's exquisite. He flips to a page and shows you a carefully illustrated guide to block tag patterns. There are 25, each used in different seasons, roles, or ceremonial publications. Some are beautiful. One looks like a bird. Another resembles a crescent moon. None of this is required. All of it is remembered. You look at the man beside you, his brush in one hand, lacquer dot on his cheek, his eyes permanently narrowed from decades of squinting. And you realize he's not just preserving letters. He's preserving relationships between block and printer, between word and meaning, between errors. Before leaving, you attempt your own label. One block, one tag, one silent thank you. Jang watches, nods once, doesn't sigh, high praise. There are 3 things printers fear above all Elsie termites, misprints and fire. Tonight, you come face to face with the last of those. It starts with a scent. Not wood smoke, not at first. Something subtler, like burnt sesame or sinned lacquer. You're in the back corridor. delivering a relabeled tray to the storage wing. When Guillaume jogs past you without speaking, that alone is enough to set off internal alarms. He only runs for 2 reasons: fire or missing snacks. Moments later, bells ring, dull, hollow chimes struck by hand. Not urgent, not panicked, but clear. Deliberate warning. Smoke near the northern cabinet row. The type room descends into organised chaos. Teams grab cloths, sand buckets, and the fire wands, long wooden poles wrapped in wet hemp rope, used to bat down burning embers. You follow Guillaume, who's already unrolling a damp quilt to throw over the smoking drawer. The source: a discarded candle, knocked over by a tired assistant's robe. The flame caught on an open ledger, and now drawer 5C, home to several high use-character trays, is smouldering at the corner. The air fills with a bitter tang, burning pine resin, damp ash, and something darker, the unmistakable scent of scorched ink. Within minutes, the fire is smothered, but the damage is clear. 2 trays partially burned, 1 drawer warped from heat. A dozen characters reduced to blackened sticks. The Mokja, Gam says nothing as he runs a fingertip across the edge of a half, charred, Joan, loyaltied, crumbles it softly between his fingers, and exhales like he's releasing a soul. You're assigned to the emergency salvage team. It's exactly as miserable as it sounds. You and Guillaume begin cataloguing the damage. Each affected character must be logged, removed, examined for partial survival, and either set aside for repair or marked for total carving. The surviving blocks are soaked in a vinegar, water mixed to stop the charring, then laid out on silk to dry, softly, like handling relics or apology letters. Among the damaged characters is Ming, command. It's burned at the lower radical, barely legible. If this goes to press like this, Guillaume mutters, we could end up writing fate instead of order. 2 strokes, entire meaning flipped. Then comes the worst part, replacement orders. The process begins with cross-referencing which characters were lost, which tray they belong to, their carving specifications, and, most critically, their historical variant. Because not all versions of a character are created equal. Some use traditional strokes, others simplified. And a few were carved centuries ago in styles no one alive remembers. Carving means recreating each character to match the old one exactly, down to the curve of a horizontal line or the angle of a dot. Otherwise, the printed page looks inconsistent, like a choir with one voice singing off key. You head to the carving workshop with Scholar Im, who delivers the damaged tray like a priest handing over relics. The carvers here are different, quieter. Their fingers ink, stained but delicate, their eyes squinted from decades of reverse, reading every character they've ever cut. The head carver, Master Bake, accepts the burned blocks with a nod. He lays them on a table, brushes ash from their surface, and murmurs, we'll need to check the stencil rolls. Stencil rolls are like the DNA of the type blocks. Brush, inked outlines of every glyph ever carved, preserved on rice paper and sorted by error. Master Bake unrolls them with the reverence of someone reading holy texts. For each lost block, he finds the matching stencil, lays it beside the remains, and mutters calculations under his breath. Historians still debate whether these stencil rolls were truly complete. Some scholars argue that the Jefeonjeon's archive was missing entire categories of glyphs, especially for foreign loanwords or ceremonial terms. Others insist there was a secret archive, a master roll locked away somewhere within the royal court. You kind of hope it's true. There's something comforting about the idea of a perfect backup. Waiting silently in the dark, you spend the afternoon prepping new wood for carving. Not just any wood. Wild pear, aged for 3 years, sanded down until it smells faintly sweet. It's sturdy, resistant to warping, and takes ink well. Each blank block is carved slightly larger than necessary and trimmed down as the strokes emerge. Guillaume watches you fumble a carving chisel. Don't even try. He advises. I once turned virtue into a fish. Carving's not your job, but tracking the process is. You document the replacements in a red, lined damage ledger, or Joan, burned, 70% loss. Ming, damaged radical, recarve initiated. Wen, scorched edge, under review. You also file a temporary ledger copy into a ceramic scroll tube. Fireproof, waterproof, bureaucrat proof. That night, as the last of the smoke clears and the trays are slotted with what's left, you realize the true fragility of this system. For all its precision and logging and obsessive ritual, it's still wood and paper, still flammable, still fallible, and yet no one panicked. Everyone just moved, responded, fixed. As if they'd always known it was part of the job. Maybe that's the secret no one writes down. That the system works not because it's perfect, but because people care enough to keep fixing it. Before sleep, you pass through the hallway where the damaged blocks are drying. They rest quietly on their silk sheets, no longer smouldering, just waiting. And you realize, with a kind of sleepy peace, that letters, like people, sometimes survive the fire with just enough left to be made whole again. It's a quiet morning in the aftermath of the fire. The air still tinged faintly with smoke and that slightly medicinal scent of damp wood. But peace, in the Jiffyonjan, rarely lasts long. You're called to assist on another of the hall's most dreaded tasks sorting. Lookalike. Glyphs. You arrive to find a special work table set up, flanked by 3 senior assistants, and a pile of recently used characters stacked in no particular order. A heap of linguistic chaos. You'll mission identify and sort out the visual near, twins that printers, carvers, and even readers most often confuse. Welcome to Glyph Purgatory. The reason this matters. Because one tiny stroke out of place in Chinese characters can change the entire meaning. Guo, nation, ves, guo, so rare variant. Gen, so space vs, k, open, or worse, Huang's emperor vs, Huang, shining. One extra line, and suddenly your reverent ode to the king becomes an awkward poem about light bulbs. Well, torches. You get the idea. You're handed a list, the top 20 most frequently confused glyphs of the quarter. Each pair must be laid side by side, verified for stroke clarity, and either approved for return or sent back for carving. And the list doesn't lie. Even the sharpest-eyed scribes regularly swap out E for E, for Chuan, or to for sh. Let's just say the consequences of confusing shame and brilliance in official correspondence are dramatic. You begin carefully comparing ze and j. They share the same upper part, but diverge halfway through. One means duty, the other debt. Philosophically close, practically dangerous. Jiam's already muttering next to you. There's no such thing as a casual radical. You pull out a block that's gone soft around the edges. Shan. It looks beautiful until you can compare it to. See? Too close. If it goes to print, someone's going to misread a passage on virtue as a celebration. You place it into the shadow tray. a temporary holding bin for blocks that require further scrutiny. It's slow, picky work. You're constantly flipping blocks over, checking notches, matching against tracing sheets, and sometimes holding them up to candlelight just to see if any cracks distort the ink flow. You never knew that wood could warp by mood, but apparently humid days produce rounder strokes, while drier days leave hairline gaps that split ink like a bad omen. Some assistants develop nicknames for common problem glyphs. The twins. They call Shi and Dri. The snake pair for Yin and Yi. And then there's the liars, a set of characters so often misread that they're logged in their own cautionary scroll. At the top of the list, Si and De, death, and not quite death, but close enough to raise eyebrows in any ceremonial letter. Historians still argue how these character confusions were addressed long term. One theory claims the court began phasing out some glyphs in favour of more distinguishable alternatives. Another insists that master carvers adopted embellishments, slight curve exaggerations or stroke spacing tricks, to nudge readers toward correct interpretation. You see hints of both approaches here. Occasionally, the opposite problem appears. Two identical looking blocks that are meant to represent entirely different words because of different contexts. Same shape, different meaning. These are called context ghosts, and even Scholar Im refers to them with a shudder. They look innocent. He mutters, until you print a farming receipt that accuses the landowner of sedition. Once, he shows you a single slip turned loan into traitor. That assistant now teaches calligraphy far, far away. Around midday, your table receives a delivery, a new set of replacement blocks from the carving workshop, meant to fix some of the characters damaged in last week's rain leak. Among them is a fresh Jun, governance. Crisp, angular, a real beauty. But right beside it sits Jun, justice. Also new, also crisp, also swapped. You catch it just in time. The blocks had been carved correctly, but labelled incorrectly in the damage recovery list. If they'd been placed in the wrong trays, it could have led to months of subtle misprints. Political justice becomes just correct politics, a small shift with large ripples. You alert the Mokja Gam. He doesn't thank you, just nods, then mutters something about giving the carving team another set of standardized notches. Gaiam calls it the notch war. No one wants to relabel everything. Again, the team breaks in the late afternoon for a round of IT. Yes, that's a real thing. Chrysanthemum and crushed plum, used to reduce eye strain and hallucinations of floating radicals. You sit, sipping it slowly, as everyone around you compares stories of their worst misreadings. Gaiam once confused Fuz's blessing with Huot's disaster. Someone else accidentally printed fire instead of festival. You all laugh. But it's the kind of laughter that comes after surviving something. Faintly haunted. Before evening ends, you're handed a final task. Write a summary sheet for the shadow tray contents. These will be stored in a separate cabinet until the carvers can address them, and they need their own audit trail. You write, total blocks flagged 41, duplicates found 6, visual risk high 12, suspected carving drift 3, action required review, isolate, recarve. You seal it with a single red stroke and place it in the ledger scroll. As you leave the sorting room, the table behind you still hums with quiet effort. People comparing strokes by lamplight, the rustle of parchment, the occasional frustrated sigh. It's peaceful, in a way, not because it's easy, but because everyone knows how delicate the system is, and keeps trying anyway. You return to your mat that night with eyes buzzing and dreams full of misread letters, chasing you down a hallway, but still better that than the Drew incident again. You wake to rain tapping against the tiled roof, a soft rhythm that would be soothing if today weren't inventory audit day. The phrase alone causes half the Ji-Fi-On-John staff to groan in unison. Even the most disciplined assistants dread this moment, because no matter how carefully the brush logs have been kept, no matter how precisely trays were labelled and blocks returned, there's always one horrible truth: an official royal audit never finds 0 mistakes. It's not meant to. The team from the Royal Bureau of Records arrives just past dawn. They travel light, but carry an air of authority heavier than any tray of typed blocks. Their robes are pristine, their scrolls crisply rolled, and their leader, an older man with a jade tablet tucked into his belt, introduces himself only as Inspector Joe. You're pulled from your usual duties and assigned to be the assistant liaison, which, as Guillaume whispers, is code for person who absorbs blame when something goes missing. Stand tall, he adds, but not too tall. They hate confidence. The audit begins in silence. Inspector Joe and his 2 scribes choose trays at random. They read off character names, one by one, and expect you to retrieve them from the appropriate slot. Instantly. No fumbling, no hesitation. If a glyph takes more than 30 seconds to locate, it's marked disordered. If it's missing altogether, well, you haven't seen what happens yet, but everyone keeps glancing nervously at the burn pit. You start with tray 1A, Joan. The scribe asks. You pull it, confident. Then, E, easy. They, tricky. Last used during the Bandit report printings. But you find it in the alternate tray. So far, so good. Then comes the moment. Inspector Joe calls for tray. A mid-use glyph, not rare, not common. It should be in tray 3F. You reach for it. It's not there. Your heart begins to race. You double, check the position, flip through the tray again. Still not there. Giam edges over. Check the overflow tray. You do. Nothing. Inspector Joe arches a single eyebrow. You sprint to the ledger, your hands trembling slightly. The last log shows it was pulled 3 days ago, but there's no return entry. A gap. A single omission in the return log. It hits you. The person who pulled the glyph. Assistant Day, the same one who, just last week, accidentally drank the good ink thinking it was plum tea. No one's entirely convinced he can count to 10 without assistance. You rush to his work mat. It's empty. The corner drawer underneath is slightly ajar. You open it. There it is, tray, wedged between a blotting cloth and a hard rice bun, saved by lunch negligence. You don't scream. You just walk very, very calmly back to the inspection table and place the block in Joe's hand. He squints at it, sniffs it. Rice, he says flatly. Then, after a pause, marked mishandled. Not lost. Proceed. Everyone exhales in unison. Historians still argue whether these inspections were tools of accountability or bureaucratic theatre. Some records suggest the audits were announced days in advance, to give scribes time to hide their sins. Others believe the surprise audits, like this one, were a way to keep even the most diligent assistants just a little bit afraid. You continue through the trays. Most are in order. A few blocks are found resting in the wrong drawer, some flipped upside down, and one mysteriously bearing a faint footprint. That one gets logged in the bizarre incident column, which now holds such entries as chewed by rat, missing due to storm, and possibly swallowed by toddler during festival. When lunch is called, the inspectors do not eat with the team. Instead, they sit beneath the eaves, sipping herbal broth in complete silence. Scholar Im murmurs, they train for 5 years to eat that slowly. You rejoin your group under the ink tent, where jokes are nervously exchanged and accusations whispered. Assistant Day, blissfully unaware of his near catastrophe, is loudly complaining that his rice bun was harder than usual. You nearly caused a diplomatic typo, Guillaume mutters. The afternoon audit shifts from trays to ledger verification. Now the scribes cross, check return logs, damage entries, brush lists, and even personal notebooks. Your scroll from the shadow tray review is pulled and read aloud. Inspector Joe scans it for inconsistencies. This one has humour, he remarks. You blink, sir. Morale? Fragile. He doesn't smile. Accurate. You pass that round. By late afternoon, the auditors pack their scrolls, seal their ink stones, and prepare to leave. Inspector Joe offers a single nod to the Mokja, Gam, who has remained statue still throughout the process. Order maintained, he says, voice flat but final. Proceed with confidence. For now. Then he walks out without another word. After he's gone, little did Shinoel lets out a collective exhale, so long it feels like the building itself sighs. Everyone collapses in small groups, sharing hard candy and stories of close calls. Someone recounts a previous audit where La was missing and nearly replaced with Yao, turning a poem about joy into a medicinal instruction. Another recalls a mishelved Tor that led a scholar to read Dynasty as mourning during a tribute ceremony. The prince laughed. The scholar did not. You return to your mat, exhausted but alive, and update the audit ledger. Blocks verified 624. Blocks misplaced 3. Blocks recovered 3. Blocks found with snacks 1. Disaster avoided. Yes, it's not perfect, but it's good enough for a world built of wood, ink, and human hands. You don't expect secrets in a place like this. The Jafionjon is all about order, clarity, and documentation. Every character tracked, every tray logged, every brush stroke accounted for. So when Jayam pulls you aside after dusk and says, "Want to see something that's not in the ledgers?" you know you're in for trouble. Or treasure. You follow him through a corridor you've never entered, past storage rooms, full of faded scrolls, spare inkstones, and the kind of furniture only used when foreign envoys visit. Eventually, he stops at a narrow wall between 2 shelving units and pulls out a small wooden drawer. Not from the front, but from the side. The shelf slides. Behind it, a hidden compartment. Inside, a single tray of wooden-type blocks, wrapped in silk and sealed with wax. Guillaume pries it open and grins. Welcome, he whispers, to the secret set. Now, officially, there's no such thing. The Royal Type catalogue is supposed to be public, regulated, reviewed, and regularly burned, and recarved to ensure consistency. But this tray, it doesn't belong to any known collection. The characters inside aren't obscure. Some are downright familiar, but they're all wrong. Not badly carved, but subtly altered. Stroke angle here, spacing there. One is a version of one king that's squatter, heavier, more ancient, looking than any used in current publications. These, Guillaume says, reverently lifting a block, were forbidden glyphs. Words we're not supposed to print anymore. You glance around nervously. Why keep them? He shrugs. Some say they're pre-Reform characters, from the dynasty before ours. Others think they're ceremonial variants. A few blocks even bear Hangul, but old, awkward versions. Prototype script, from before it was made public. He's not kidding. You lift one block and see a Hangul syllable that looks like a cross between two consonants and a hiccup. Not quite right, but not unfamiliar either. You ask the obvious question, why hide them? Guillaume hesitates, then answers with a shrug. Power, maybe. Or fear. If you can print a word no one else can read, you control what it means. And if you can destroy that word well, who would know it existed? You sit back, stunned. All this time, you've been fussing over ledgers and brush logs and notches in trays, and here, tucked away in a shadowed panel, is an entire linguistic underground. And it gets stranger. Tucked into the silk beside the tray is a scroll, thin, water, stain, unlabeled. You unroll it gently. It's not a ledger. It's a poem, written in old style Hanja and scattered Hangul, ink faded nearly to nothing. The subject, letters, not metaphorical ones, literal wooden blocks. It reads like a love letter to type. You speak without breath, carved into silence, lined in drawers, waiting for someone to believe you again. You look at Guillaume. No one knows who wrote it, he says. Some think it was a scholar who hated the reform. Others say it was just a bored carver with too much wine and a brush. Historians still argue whether secret trays like this one ever truly existed. The official records, of course, say no. The Royal Bureau insists all type blocks were standardized and reviewed annually. But every so often, strange characters appear in early drafts of court documents, or in rural printing centres that claim imperial connections. It's led some scholars to believe there was a parallel library, used only by a select few. You return the tray to its silk. It feels wrong to keep holding it. These characters were hidden for a reason. Maybe fear, maybe protection, maybe both. Before you leave, Guillaume presses something into your hand. A single type block. The character is yin, hidden. Keep it, he says. Everyone should have at least one word. They don't show anyone else. Back in your sleeping alcove, you stare at the block under lamplight. It's heavier than the others. Not in weight, but in feeling. The idea that language can be hidden. That printing, for all its order and procedure, has shadows. Words that wait. Words that might never be spoken again. You tuck the block under your mat, unsure why. Not for use. Not for study. Just to remember that even in the most controlled, catalogued, tracked place in the kingdom, mystery still exists. And the letters. They keep secrets too. You return to the main hall the next day, feeling slightly different. Once you've held a hidden character in your hand, touched a poem no one was meant to read, the routine of brush logs and tray slots seems thinner. Still essential, still precise, but no longer the whole picture. But there's no time to get philosophical. Today, you're working with the accounting scribe on something far less romantic, tracking the printers themselves. Yes, not the letters, but the people who move them, because someone, somewhere, decided it was finally time to figure out how much this all costs. You're given access to the wage and materials ledgers, thick scrolls stacked in the back of the archive. They track block maintenance, brush replacement, oil purchases, and, most interestingly, salary charts. Printed on yellowed paper, they're covered in tiny characters and complex grids. There's even a side column for disappearances. Your job. Cross. Reference the logs of usage and labour hours against payroll to help prepare the seasonal budget scroll for the Royal Treasury. Within an hour, you realise the type isn't the only thing being overworked. Some scribes log over 80 hours a week, not counting the time they spend repairing brushes or re-inking trays. Others bounce between roles, carving one day, sorting another, copying ledgers the next. Guillaume, somehow, has appeared on 3 different rosters under 3 slightly different name spellings. You ask him about it. He just shrugs. Keeps the inspectors guessing. And then there are the absences. They're not marked in bold, not listed plainly, but you notice patterns. A character block goes missing, then a name disappears from the ledger. A week later, both reappear, suddenly and without explanation. You ask Scholarim if that's normal. He sighs and closes his scroll slowly. People burn out, he says, some quietly, some dramatically. One day you're alphabetizing Hangul syllables. The next you've vanished into the woods to raise goats and forget what punctuation is. You think he's joking. Then he adds, "The goat part's real." Assistant Min sends letters. They're oddly shaped. The ledgers also reveal something else. Ink quotas. Each team is allocated a fixed amount of ink per week, calculated based on anticipated usage. But printers being printers, they find ways to game the system. Some dilute the ink to make it last longer. Others quietly borrow from neighbouring teams. One rogue assistant even invented a recipe using crushed elderberries and soup that reportedly worked. Okay, if you don't mind everything smelling like jam. As you dig deeper, a picture emerges. The Jefyeonjeon runs on people barely holding it together. The system is brilliant, yes, but the human element, flawed, tired, occasionally poetic, is what keeps it breathing. You come across a marginal note in one ledger, scribbled beside a salary record, paid late, still returned to work. Possibly out of loyalty, possibly out of habit. It's unsigned. Somewhere in the archive, you find an old promotion list. Names of assistants elevated to senior roles, marked with red ink. You trace them through the records. Half stayed, half didn't. Some vanished after misprints. Some left after a fire. A few were quietly removed from payroll with nothing but a line. Reassigned to rural post. Guillaume appears beside you, looking up the ghosts. He asks. You nod. They don't leave because they hate the work, he says. They leave because the work never ends. You realise what he means. There's no finished here. No last page, no final print. Just letters always needing to be found, logged, cleaned and placed. One block out of order, and the whole document falters. And yet, despite the strain, you see tiny signs of care in the records. One assistant always logs characters with a brush flourish, as if signing a letter. Another underlines glyphs she's proud of carving. Someone started drawing stars, next to particularly neat ledger entries. Historians rarely talk about this. The messiness of people, the quiet rebellion in pen strokes, the emotional cost of maintaining intellectual order. But here, in these worn scrolls and smudged side notes, it's obvious. Tracking the letters is only half the job. You close the ledger. Tonight, you return to your mat a little heavier. Not sad, just aware. Every system relies on human hands, and human hands, no matter how skilled, need rest. You press your fingers to your temple, ink stained and tired, and whisper to yourself a small mantra. 3 strokes make a character. 500 make a letter, but one lost scribe can misalign a kingdom. Maybe tomorrow you'll check in on Assistant Min, or at least his goats. It's been a long month. You realize this only when you sit down to reshelve tray 7F and notice that your knees now creak in perfect sync with the drawer sliders. Gaiam calls it printer's rhythm, like it's a badge of honor. You're not so sure. Today, you're revisiting the dustiest corner of the archive, the place where trays go to sleep. It's not exactly a ceremony, but it feels like one. After years of service, blocks that are no longer used, due to language reforms, simplified forms, or shifts in royal decree, are officially retired. You follow the Mokja Gam into the chamber. He walks slowly, as if the room demands reverence. Dust lies thick on the floor, disturbed only by careful footpaths. You pass shelves marked with years 1421, 1433, 1447. Each tray has a label, each block a history. These characters aren't broken, they're just out of time. You open one tray at random. The glyphs inside are beautiful. Older carving styles, thicker strokes. One is so ornate it almost resembles lace. That one, the Mokja, Gam says, was used once in a wedding scroll, then never again. You glance down at the ink smudge note in the tray. 2. Elaborate. Caused 4 ink clogs. You smile. The process of retiring a character isn't simple. First, it has to be reviewed, checked against modern lists, verified for redundancy. Then a notation is made in the retirement ledger, and finally, the block is cleaned, oiled, and shelved in this room. But here's what surprises you. None of the ledgers are discarded. Along the far wall, in rows as tall as you are, lie the old brush logs, the damage reports, the tray maps from decades past. Faded, yes, but intact. Gaiam joins you, carrying a tea tray and 2 chipped cups. Most people forget about these, he says, setting 1 cup beside you. But they're still checked. Every year. Be who? He shrugs. Someone. Anyone who still remembers what these letters meant. You sip the tea. Sweet, faintly herbal, and trace your fingers over a particularly soft-looking block. Dane, it says. Classic. Protocol. Tradition. It feels right. Historians still puzzle over why Korea preserved so many unused characters. China, after all, regularly culled entire sections of script. Japan, too, modernized away dozens of glyphs. But here, in this quiet chamber, the philosophy seems clear. Just because a word isn't printed doesn't mean it's forgotten. Somewhere in the back of the room, you find an annotated tray, each character paired with a small note written in delicate brush handwriting. Tsun, once used for a letter of apology. Oliengf, found in a border report about stolen grain. He, printed in a poem about snow. You blink. These aren't ledgers. They're memories. You wonder who wrote them. Some assistant, maybe, or a carver with a poetic streak. They had no reason to do it, no official requirement. But they did it anyway, just like you did last week when you logged, tray, and added, found next to a rice bun, no longer sticky. As you reshelve a tray labelled obsolete ceremonial, you find something odd wedged between 2 blocks. It's a slip of mulberry paper, old but intact. On it, just a few words. If I disappear, check the tray where I left my heart. No name, no context. You glance at Gaiam. He reads it, smiles faintly. Well, he says, At least they weren't dramatic or anything. You both laugh, soft, tired laughter that echoes like a yawn through the shelves. By evening, you've returned several trays, updated their ledger status, and cleaned 3 blocks that, by all reasonable logic, will never be used again. Still, you polish them like they're destined for a royal decree. On your way out, you pause at the door. Just before the exit, there's a single tray that hasn't been shelved. It's empty, save for one lone character. You, remains. Leftovers, remainder, it hasn't been logged. You sit quietly and write its final note. Last of its tray. Still sharp. Still useful. Maybe. Depends on who's reading. You tuck it beside the block and slide the tray into place. Later, as the lights dim across the hall and the lanterns glow like patient moons, you lie on your mat and realize not everything that matters gets used. Some words sit quietly, waiting for the right moment, and some, simply by existing, are enough. It's your last night on the letter floor. Not permanently, maybe. But something about tonight feels final. Like the wood grain on the tray handles has absorbed your fingerprints, and the blocks have memorized the rhythm of your breath. You're not here to sort or carve or log. Tonight, you're just walking. The print hall is empty but not silent. The wood creaks softly. Paper rustles in the corner, where a breeze slips under the shutters. You pass rows of trays that you've come to know better than some people in your own life. There's 4D, home to the government verbs. 7F, where the radicals live in organised anarchy. Tray 3B, your old nemesis. The one that once dropped half its contents into a bowl of porridge during the mid-summer rush. You pass by them all, fingertips grazing drawer edges like you're saying goodbye at a funeral with no guests. And then, at the far end, where the oil lamps burn low and the scent of soot hangs faintly in the rafters, you come to the press itself. It sits still now, all motion and ink washed clean. Its beams are polished from years of pressure, on paper, on people. The inkstone beside it has cooled, but the shape of yesterday's work lingers in its surface. You run a finger along it. Not cold, just waiting. There's a legend some printers whisper when they've had too much plum wine, that if you walk the press floor after midnight, the characters begin to speak. Not aloud. Not in voices, but in soft impressions, memories stored in wood, in brush, in worn drawer corners, and faint ink, ghosts left on cloth. A phrase half printed, a glyph that always smudges no matter what. A word that once saved a diplomat from disaster by appearing, miraculously, in the right tray at the right moment. You smile. You don't believe in talking letters, but you do believe in what they carry. They've carried edicts and poems, confessions and laws. They've printed birth names and posthumous titles. And, once, a love letter from a carver to a calligrapher hidden in the margin of a shipping manifest. You pause beside a tray left slightly open. It holds moan, dream. You lift it, brush off a speck of dust, and set it back with care. The hall has been through everything. Fires, reforms, audits, ink shortages, ghosts of forgotten fonts. And yet the system holds. Because the blocks hold. Because people do. Historians still argue whether this moment in history, the mid-15th century golden age of Korean printing, was truly efficient, or just exhaustively maintained by the sheer will of overqualified, underfeft scribes. Some praise its order, some criticize its human cost, but no one can deny its beauty. You step outside just for a breath. The moon is high. casting pale light over the courtyard. Somewhere, a monk chants in the distance. A wind stirs the plum trees, and beneath your robes, you still carry that one secret block. Yin. Hidden. You haven't shown it to anyone. You probably never will, but you'll keep it. Not as a tool, or a trophy, just as a reminder that somewhere in the world, there's a room full of forgotten words, still quietly in place, waiting for someone to return, to read, to print again. You whisper one word before heading back in, remain, and the blocks do. Always. So now, here you are, still, breathing slow. The letters are sleeping now, tucked into their trays like rows of tiny memories. The inkstones are washed and put away. The lamps have been turned down to soft coals. All the noise, the sorting, the muttered arguments over radicals and tray codes. Gone. Just silence now. A peaceful kind of silence. The kind you earn. You stretch your legs out on the mat. Let your head sink deeper into the pillow. Maybe you can still smell the pine from the block handles. Maybe your fingers remember the feel of a character edge, smooth from 100 passes under a steady hand. There's nothing left to fix tonight. No more glyphs to log. No inspectors. No missing letters. Just the cool of the night air and the warmth left behind in the ink cloths. Even the tray with you remains is still for now. You think about how long the words have waited, and how carefully, patiently, human hands kept them in place. And maybe, just maybe, the letters are grateful too. So rest now. Let your breath grow long. Let your thoughts slow to a soft hum. Tomorrow, the trays will still be there. The characters will wait. And if you forget your place for a little while, it's okay. The words will remember.